People keep telling me this movie is propaganda. But it is smashing records at the box office, with Dhurandhar 2 becoming the highest grossing Hindi film ever in India. And that made me think. Propaganda is usually forced onto people, but Dhurandhar is clearly connecting with Indians organically. So I decided to check out the big 3 claims of propaganda and put them to the test, to finally decode if Dhurandhar is government-sponsored disinformation or a genuine cultural phenomenon. Here's what I found. So let's get the obvious out of the way. Dhurandhar is not a documentary, it is a fictional film. The thing is, it is based off of real life events. Some characters are one-to-one based off of real life people like Rahman Decade or SP Chaudhry Aslam. Others are amalgamations of real life figures, like Major Iqbal or even the main character Jaskirat/Hamza. The plot is fictional, but many of the events, including all the terror attacks, I want to emphasize this. Every terror attack is real. In the first Dhurandhar in particular, they even have recordings of the attacks and news commentary from that era. Other parts like the Liari gang war and assassinations of figures are pretty much on point. Just the path to get there has some masala. In Dhurandhar 2, there's a montage of these people called the Unknown Men who basically liquidate various terrorists across Pakistan. One big critique I have of this movie is that it wasn't expanded upon. It was indeed a very complex operation that took years to create that network of operatives, informants, and petty criminals who carried out the assassinations. I mention this because in the film, it looks like a Tarantino-esque mass killing sequence that just spontaneously happened. But again, it was real. All those terrorists killed were real people. So the film is a blending of reality and fiction. Think like Zero Dark 30 or Schindler's List, or even my favorite, Inglourious Basterds. They all blend real-life incidents with some storytelling sizzle. This genre is called historical fiction. And I think that's where people get into this whole propaganda aspect of it. Many have criticized this movie for blending these real incidents with the embellishment of fiction. But we have to step back here and think. Like, this is cinema. This is art. I'm not expecting a movie on Pearl Harbor or the Mongol conquest or Rwandan Civil War to be one-to-one accurate in terms of events. It's a movie. So I think that critique is mostly sour grapes. Dhurandhar is not positioning itself as a documentary. What it is using painstaking research on the events that transpired and weaving that into a coherent cinematic story for your and mine's entertainment. Dhurandhar is definitely fiction, but it is built on a foundation of facts that most Indians lived through and the world ignored. So is that really worthy of being called propaganda? I think that's cinema doing what cinema is supposed to do. And nowhere is this more the case than the 26/11 sequence in Dhurandhar 1. 26/11 was a real terror attack that happened on November 26, 2008 in Mumbai. Pakistani terrorists came on boat from Karachi to Mumbai. They acquired IDs with Hindu names, donned sacred red strings on their wrists. And they did this to not only disguise themselves, but also to try to pin the blame on Hindu extremism. The terrorists then proceeded to attack various locations in Mumbai with AK-47s, bombs, and grenades. 174 people were killed and over 300 were wounded. Luckily, an officer named Tukaram Omble captured a terrorist named Ajmal Kasab, preventing this conspiracy of Hindu terror. More on this angle later, as it's super Omble charged Kasab with nothing more than a bamboo stick. He was shot 40 times on the way, but even after all this, he overpowered Kasab, leading to his capture. Now this is important because it segues into our next charge, Dhurandhar's portrayal of Indian domestic politics. Because while honest critics will acknowledge its basis in reality, they usually get wound up on a political aspect of Dhurandhar. And make no mistake, Dhurandhar is a political film. It takes sides very clearly. So this is something we need to confront head on in our next section. Dhurandhar's director Aditya Dhar makes no qualms about displaying his antipathy towards the Congress Party and admiration for the BJP. So it's this idea we have to dissect. Why exactly does Dhar hate Congress so much? And is there a basis for all the events he describes? For that, we have to rewind to 1990. Dhar's background is that of the Kashmiri Pandits. These are the Hindu minority of Kashmir who have kept their indigenous traditions and religion alive while most of the valley was converted to Islam. While many exoduses of Kashmiri Hindus happened in the past due to persecution, 1990 would prove to be the final one, as a radicalized Kashmiri Muslim population threatened Hindus with 3 words: Galiv, Galiv, ya Chaliv. Convert, die, or run. This slogan echoed throughout the valley as the last Kashmiri Hindus left their homeland forever. Now, Dhar actually grew up in Delhi, significantly south of the valley, but he saw his family and people stream in as refugees with tales of the horror and betrayal. For anyone, this would leave a significant imprint. Now the thing is, most people think the Congress Party presided over this entire event. But that isn't totally true. The Congress Party was actually in the opposition at this time. So why would Aditya Dhar dislike the INC rather than the BJP? Well, the INC was in power in the lead up to these events. They were the ones pampering the separatists and ignoring the warning signs of extremism. When they lost the elections leading up to the Exodus, the victorious coalition in 1990 was actually composed of left-wing, centrist, and right-wing parties, including the BJP. It was a chaotic and confused alliance, one where left-wing ideas and softness towards these separatists actually won out over the BJP's more robust stance. After the Kashmiri Hindu exodus and other communal conflagrations happening at that time, the BJP actually withdrew from the alliance out of protest, thereby collapsing the coalition. Fast forward almost 30 years later, Kashmir was still boiling. You see, Kashmir had something called special status through a law called Article 370, which the Congress Party implemented. This special status gave them a lot more autonomy over their own affairs, but also baked in state discrimination towards not just other Indians or Hindus, but also groups like women, LGBT people, and lower castes. This autonomy was also a continuous cause of terror attacks. That is until 2019, when Prime Minister Narendra Modi and the BJP revoked Article 370, integrating Kashmir into India's mainstream. After which, terror attacks have gone down. Investment has gone up, though many Kashmiri Pandits are still wary of returning to the valley. Nonetheless, Modi and the BJP acquired a lot of goodwill from the community and India at large for this move. For Dhar and other Kashmiri Pandits, the Congress Party was seen as mollycoddling Kashmiri extremists and showing no interest in seeing Kashmiri Hindus return to the valley. During their time in power, whether before or after the Exodus, the situation in Kashmir rapidly devolved into more and more violence. Not just that, but this idea of secularism being corrupted into religious appeasement of minorities and unfair practices towards Hinduism is a big charge against the Congress Party. And that charge holds weight when you see that the government does have different laws for Hindus versus other religious groups who have more autonomy in worship or even their own civic legal codes. So, a Hindu has different laws than Muslims who use Sharia in certain matters. That doesn't sound secular to me. Nevertheless, this all came to fore recently on Twitter, when people began to dig up old tweets and policies and speeches from the Congress Party and other left-wing parties during the time of when Dhurandhar takes place, to test whether the film was propaganda or reality. And look, I'm not an Indian citizen, nor did I grow up or was born in India. But as a third-party observer, there is some blood-boiling stuff. For example, after the gruesome 26/11 attacks, the INC claimed that they could not do anything against Pakistan. No retaliation, no justice, nada. But that's not the worst part. Remember how those Pakistani terrorists wore like red strings on their wrist to pin the attack on Hindus? Well, Congress Party affiliates wrote a literal book trying to do the exact same thing, framing 26/11 as a Hindu terrorist conspiracy. That's the exact plan that Pakistan was trying to carry out. Now just imagine that. The ruling party of India at the time had the same agenda as an enemy nation that just attacked it. Rahul Gandhi, who is the current leader of the INC, less than a year after the terror attack, claimed that Hindu terrorism was a worse threat to India than terrorism from Pakistan. There's a lot more crazy real-life events alluded in the film that actually happened. So again, from a third-party perspective, I totally get why Dhurandhar hit so hard for Indians. This type of stuff must have been maddening to go through when you are the constant victim of terror attacks. Yet you are the ones getting blamed by the people who should be protecting you in the first place. It's encapsulated in this graph where we see how clearly terrorism correlates to INC rule and falls when the BJP takes over. And again, this is data, this is math. It's hard evidence about what is happening, not propaganda. And I think that's why Dhurandhar has been such a mass phenomenon. It channels the injustice felt by so many Indians over the decades and presents the perspective of a people who have been wronged in a way that's just plain astonishing. I think this is really where the knife gets twisted in the guts of the critics here. It is not just that these facts are presented. They're presented with style. Dhurandhar weaves ace cinematography, gut-wrenching gore, an immersive soundtrack, an intelligent plot all together around a reality that many Indians experienced. In the first Dhurandhar especially, the actual footage used gave people flashbacks of what they felt in an age where India was, to be blunt, getting absolutely f***ed and could do nothing about it. Like, I'm getting worked up just talking about it. But I could not imagine what it is like to actually have lived through all of this. So yes, Dhar is pro-BJP and anti-INC. He makes that clear in the movie. But his bias comes not only from his own lived experience, but the lived experience of 1 billion plus Indians. And it's those same Indians who voted the BJP in for a reason over and over and over again. So who am I, or is anyone to judge at the end of the day? Indians have voted at the booth and at the cinema halls for what they want. And that brings us to the verdict. Is Dhurandhar pro-BJP? Definitely. But is that bias earned? Given what Indians have lived through? I think that's a question worth sitting with. Yet there's one last part that we have to examine. What about the non-Indians in the movie? This series actually mostly takes place in Pakistan, not India. So what about the accusations of this movie not only being anti-Pakistani, but anti-Muslim? One of the weirdest parts about Dhurandhar's success is the silence of Bollywood. Why would this be? Well, many critics of Dhurandhar point to the idea that the film is an exercise in bigotry. So you may think Bollywood stars don't want to indulge in such stuff. But let's check out this chart analyzing bias in Bollywood movies. We see clear biases in how certain groups are portrayed. Some good, others bad. So what is determining who is the good guy and who is the bad guy here? For that, we have to understand the economics behind Bollywood. Bollywood is centered around Mumbai, India, but it also has a massive audience not just in the Middle East, but also even in Pakistan. Both of these places actually banned Dhurandhar. But there's one Bollywood fan in particular within Pakistan that we need to talk about here. He's actually featured in the second Dhurandhar. His name is Dawood Ibrahim. Dawood Ibrahim was a kingpin of the Mumbai mafia scene in the 1980s and 90s. Bollywood had massive links with Dawood through things like money laundering and funding. So Dawood's opinions and beliefs would mold Bollywood itself. Various Bollywood actors and workers are on record for having performed for him, collaborated with him, and even being extorted or killed by him if they didn't comply. Now, Dawood is a Muslim, but I wouldn't say he's like a regular Muslim. Dawood Ibrahim is proven to have terror links. As he rose in the Mumbai underworld, his drugs business got caught up with terror funding as well. Dawood was behind the devastating 1993 Mumbai bomb blast, causing him to flee Pakistan after the authorities pinned the terror attacks on him. Yet even today, Dawood still has links to the industry through family and old connections in Mumbai. In Dhurandhar 2, Dawood was shown as a frail and corrupt fanatic, an image that the usually flashy and outgoing Dawood would not appreciate. Dawood himself hasn't been seen in years though, as rumors of a debilitating poisoning similar to what happened in Dhurandhar 2 swirled a few years back. But beyond this Bollywood bias for apparent bigotry, is the film Dhurandhar actually bigoted? Well, popular Bollywood director and Dhurandhar superfan Ram Gopal Varma made a good point in a recent interview. He says that just as a prosecutor shows the facts in a manner to prove his case, so is Aditya Dhar showing the facts to present India's case. Why should he be penalized for that as an Indian citizen? We have various films from America, the UK, and other countries lauding operations and sacrifices that their military or intelligence personnel have done. Is that necessarily propaganda? The films use real-life names and real-life events, and yes, real-life footage and clippings about what happened and how Pakistan has certainly sponsored terror attacks against India, killing thousands of Indians in the process. The evidence is overwhelming. So going back to Varma's point, isn't a country allowed to put out its perspective? Forget being pro-BJP, this film is pro-India. It is telling India's point of view unabashedly. Previously, this was looked down upon in Bollywood, which is why they've gotten so unsettled. Other Bollywood movies about Indian military or spy operations would have like crazy things like wacky jetpacks or Indian and Pakistani spies working together to defeat a corrupt raw officer, or the India-Pakistan conflict being solved by spies dancing together. I mean, check out this clip from an Instagram comedian named Swapnil Pandey. That sums it all up.
We must infiltrate the very core of terrorism in Pakistan.
इतिहास आना साहब, अब पाकिस्तान का मुस्तकबिल हिंदुस्तान तय करेगा। रुक जाओ हमजा, पाकिस्तान की आवाम भी अमन और शांति ही चाहती है। सही कह रहा हूँ मेजर इकबाल। डांस करोगे? एक मिनट, मेरे ही घर में घुस के, मेरी ही आंखों के सामने खनानी को मार दूंगा मैं। रुक जाओ हमजा, खनानी तो एक नेक और पाक इंसान है जो 500 और 1000 रुपए के डुप्लीकेट्स इसलिए बना रहा है ताकि वो इंडिया जैसे देश को गरीबी से मुक्त कर सके। He's a nice guy हमजा। सही कह रहा हूँ मेजर इकबाल। डांस करोगे?
Like, how can that define the relationship between India and Pakistan when we know Pakistan is sponsoring terror attacks in India even till this day? Honestly, this accusation of propaganda just seems to be a case of projection. For Bollywood spent decades systematically distorting its messaging and pushing its own propaganda. So when a film like Dhurandhar comes out and shows them the mirror, they can't face themselves or reality. Even this idea of Dhurandhar being anti-Muslim looks to be along the same lines where Bollywood is just used to doing its own bias against other religions or communities, so they assume Dhurandhar is doing the same. This is despite the fact that there are various good Pakistani and Indian Muslim characters in the film that Indian audiences like and sympathize with, especially in the sequences of Balochi Muslims who the Pakistani state is oppressing again even till this day. In that way, this is a film that actually sympathizes with these Muslims. In Dhurandhar 2, the main character Hamza goes into detail about how the state of Pakistan terrorizes not just Balochis or Indians or non-Muslims, but also the average Pakistani. One of the reasons that India has soared past Pakistan economically is that the Pakistani state has invested more in terrorism than its economy. The same terrorists the state has sponsored to attack India sometimes wild out and attack Pakistan or splinter and have sectarian or regional conflicts. This constant wave of terror within Pakistan caused what Hamza is referring to, where the quality of life of an average Pakistani is plummeting because the Pakistani state focuses on poisoning people's minds rather than progress. I think we are again seeing this pattern where critics are just mad at Dhurandhar for displaying reality. The scenes that show non-Muslim Pakistanis being burned alive for fake blasphemy charges, the anti-Hindu rhetoric from various characters, the dysfunctions and hypocrisies of Pakistani society and state are all based on very real things. We can even measure this in data with how the Hindu population in Pakistan is pulverized today, or how Pakistan committed one of the worst genocides since the Holocaust on Hindus in East Pakistan, or the almost bi-weekly reports of underage Hindu girls in Pakistan being kidnapped by older men for a forced marriage or worse. These are all critically underreported issues that deserve to be shown and discussed, as the mainstream media, for whatever reason, chooses to focus on other topics. And pointing this out isn't bigotry. This is shining a light on reality. And I think it's that light that is what critics are having the biggest problem with. So coming back to our initial question on silence. Dhurandhar makes Bollywood uncomfortable because celebrating Dhurandhar means acknowledging what Bollywood was, who it served, and why it told the biased stories it told. That's uncomfortable for people who built careers inside that system. And like I said earlier, whether you agree or disagree with Dhurandhar's bias or politics, the series is an absolute blast to watch. If the movies presented facts but sucked, no one would care as much. But that combination of story, style, and real substance is what's really making the critics go crazy. So at this point, I think we've examined the movie enough to give a final verdict as well as my own perspective on the movie.
In the world,
Ain't it funny we get ominous when I'm in this? Ain't it funny that the prophet is the prophet? Ain't it funny critics call me when they call it peace?
Okay, let's be direct. Is Dhurandhar propaganda? I think it is, but I think every movie is. Bollywood in the past was captured by a narco-terrorist, and apparently still is, who pushed his viewpoints into movies. Bollywood movies frequently toed the line of the Congress Party in the past in terms of values and messaging. Only recently has some of it started swinging to the center or right rather than decades of leaning a hard left. And this happens across the world. For the last several decades, Hollywood has always leaned towards democratic and liberal causes, even with the odd pro-US military movie here and there. And that's just how it is. We see the same type of picking and choosing in the UK or China or Turkey or anywhere, honestly. Dhurandhar is singled out because this is probably the first right-wing film or even piece of content that is nothing less than a phenomenon. I don't see Republicans making media like this that hits in America. Most so-called right-wing art or media honestly just sucks. It's either too ham-fisted or too overt, or just doesn't have aesthetics like that. But Dhurandhar has all of it. Dhurandhar connects with the audience not just because it highlights their lived experience, but also because it is entertaining. Now, I think Dhurandhar is a lot more centrist than right-wing personally, but one thing it does that I think is absolutely awesome is how it integrates like non-Indian or non-right-wing elements into it to make it a cohesive and innovative experience. Like Shashwat Sachdev, the movie's music director, integrates hip-hop, EDM, Qawwali, Indian classical music, R&B, Punjabi folk, hard rock, and other diverse music sources to create a banger of a soundtrack. You would assume a straight-up right-wing or conservative movie would only integrate like some low-key classical pieces or bhajans or something over the top and masculine always. But Dhurandhar shows incredible sonic range. I honestly just adore the soundtrack. The other part, which is a big departure from classic Indian filmmaking, is the realism in the movies. Now, while the second one dials up the masala definitely, in general, the film is restrained without the superhero-type antics we usually see in Indian movies. The hero faces challenges, defeats, uncertainty, loss, and goes through the ringer during the tale. The violence is raw and gory for sure, but again, it looks real. And while I started this segment saying that I do think Dhurandhar is propaganda, I think it's good propaganda. It communicates ideas and events that have touched every Indian. It is a reminder of what Indians have sacrificed and faced. But more than that, it is a display of bravery, this willingness to act and do the right thing for the greater good that I think sometimes is lost in the notion of India today. Perhaps that's why when each movie begins with verses from the Bhagavad Gita, they were received so deeply. Because for a long time, Indians have been a people who debate, who think, who philosophize and withdraw. But India is not just that. The Gita teaches us that Indians are also a people of action, of courage, of dharma. So it's here where I think Dhurandhar really hits the nail on the head. Beyond all the politics, real-life events, and cinematic spectacle, Dhurandhar tells the Indian audience that being Indian doesn't just mean tolerance. It means the courage to stand up for righteousness, regardless of the consequences.